Welcome everybody. We're going to wait just another minute or two just to make sure we have the full audience on here, and then we'll get going. TJ, saw your post earlier, by the way, too. 1 year,
Yep. Yeah. Today makes a full year since I started here at Nichols.
good post. You see my guy in there too. Do you know what I'm talking about? Which picture?
Yep. Yeah, Luke. I made
Yeah,
sure to put
yeah.
him up there.
Almost missed it too. And I feel like I got to text him something snarky too, like that's the most run you get, dude, or something like that. I know he's been playing good. He played good minutes last year, but
Yeah, he would appreciate a text like that, I think.
he loves it. He loves it. All right, so we might as well go in. Welcome everybody, coaches. Really appreciate it. My name's Geoff. I'm the head of performance and sales at FYTT. The first thing I want to do is allow our guest coaches here to introduce themselves.
So my name's TJ Cahill. I am the director of sports performance and head strength and conditioning coach at Nichols College, which is a small Division III school in Dudley, Massachusetts, just south of Worcester. Like Geoff mentioned, this is the end of my first year, going into my second year here at Nichols, and I've spent most of my career at the Division III level, previously with 4 years at Amherst College prior to Nichols.
And I'm Brian Canida. I'm the fitness and performance coordinator at Mercersburg Academy. Starting my fifth year there. I'm also the head strength and conditioning coach at Wilson College, starting my second year there.
Just a little busy, Brian. Just pulling double duty. So we're really lucky to have these guys, and this was, I've been with Fit for about a year now. I was a Fit customer for about 5.5 years before that, going back to 2021. So I've known the product and these guys for a long time. And in the year that I've been with Fit, we've done a bunch of these events, and this is one that when we started talking about putting together, I was really excited. We call it the lean performance playbook, but for me, it's kind of going back to my roots. For those who aren't familiar with me, I was recently the head strength and conditioning coach at Northeastern University in Boston, which is a mid-major Division I. But for a long time prior to that, I ran the program at Division III UMass Boston, so actually a competitor of TJ before he was there. And so for me, this is something that I'm very passionate about, right? It's like trying to create a high performance environment in an imperfect circumstance. And to me, this is really, in a lot of ways, it's the meat and potatoes of sports performance training. The percentage of environments that are perfect with unlimited budget and resources and staff, those are very, very small. 99% of us were in these imperfect environments and scenarios. We're in the dungeon like Brian is right now. I'm sure that background looks very familiar to everybody, where we're kind of grinding, and it's such a motivated field and a motivated population of individuals that we're always trying to figure out how to do things the best that we can. These two guys are great examples of people that are doing things at a level that's almost it's almost tough to comprehend. I've known TJ's work a little bit longer, Brian just about 6 months, but the work these guys are doing is unbelievable. So we're excited to kind of bring that to you guys. Just a quick nugget on Fit for those that are joining us for the first time, and if you're not familiar with Fit, Fit is a sports science and programming tool, strength and conditioning programming tool. The biggest thing with Fit is that we help you connect your performance information and your data directly to your programming. And if you can do that efficiently, you can kind of exponentially increase your work, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about today, and how we're getting that done. And we're all doing it a little bit differently, which is cool. Always a thank you to some of our partners, and in this particular case, one thing I want to highlight is for every Ohio State or Chicago White Sox or dynamic sports training that we work with, there's five more programs like a Nichols College or a Mercersburg Academy where it's more in the vein of what we're talking about today. Single coach, small staff, minimal or odd resources, and then these guys are working as hard as they can to create the best program that they can. And just a little agenda today. It's like, what are we really all trying to do? We want to boil this down to three simple things that we're all battling all the time: limited staff, small budgets, not enough time. There's obviously a ton of overlap between those three things. Putting this presentation together today, almost everything we talk about, I view it as being those three categories. But we'll try to break it down as much as we can, and address each one of those things individually. One of the themes for today is be proactive. Be proactive, anticipate challenges, have conversations ahead of time. I think one of the things that happens in these environments that I've been a part of, both at the mid-major university and certainly in Division III, is we just get so bogged down that so many things get lost in the shuffle, and it's normal and it's always going to happen. One of the problems with that is that when challenges arise or things don't go the way that we want them to, or outcomes, I'm sure we've all been a part of this, when outcomes aren't how we want them to be, losing season, losing streak, whatever, we all get very reactionary. And to be totally candid, that's oftentimes not the strength and conditioning coach. Sometimes we're the ones who have to be reactionary to a coach being reactionary. And it just creates challenges. So one of the things we're going to talk about is being proactive. And this timing is perfect. And TJ, I want to bring you in on this, right? Because it's like you're getting ready for football to return, men's and women's soccer shortly thereafter. I'm sure you're kind of considering your planning for the year. And I kind of want that to be the first thing that we talk about is like when you start to prepare for the calendar year, what are some processes that you go through and how do you communicate that information to coaches and athletes?
Absolutely. So overall, when we're looking at our year training, the important thing is to think about where we want the athletes to be when the time comes for them to perform and then kind of work backwards from that. You hear the term in the field all the time, reverse engineering, kind of working backwards, begin with the end in mind, a lot of, common phrases thrown out there. And so that's why, like with, the example of the picture you got up there, I like to lay out the entire year for us on fit, and then be able to kind of parse out, all right, these weeks we're focusing on this, these weeks we're focusing on this, and kind of see the grand scale of things rather than just looking at things, day to day or week to week, but thinking about the entire big picture of their athletic development over the course of that entire year. If it's a spring sport, what does our fall look like to develop them and help them get bigger, faster, stronger, in better shape? If it's a fall sport, what does our season look like throughout the course of the season so that we're playing our best come the end of the season, and not peaking too early, but also not burning out by the end of the season as well. And so I think it's just about thinking, in terms of where do you want them to be when the important times of year come up, and then working backwards from that.
And I want to focus in on the conversations that happen, right? Because it's like we all have different planning and programming strategies, but like talk to me more about the coaching conversations. Like how much are you able to be proactive with that and kind of wrangle coaches to talk about things ahead of time? What are we going to do in the preseason? What are we going to do during this portion of the schedule? I can see here in like this imagery, like you laid out an entire season, which I'm sure impacts what you're doing. What are those conversations like? And how do they impact you?
Our coaches here are awesome in that they're very receptive to everything that we're doing. We have a ton of support from our sport coaches, in terms of, knowing that, this is kind of what we're good at. And, we have conversations with them about, how can I support what you've got going on the field? And we're able to, adjust things daily based on, how practices are going. We can talk, with our coaches in a broader scale about, this is what they want their week to look like from a practice perspective, and then we can kind of reflect that on our plan. And so when they're in season, it's they're driving most of the decision making and all of that, and we're helping support that. And then it kind of flips towards the off season once the priority switches to be more focused on development and strength conditioning and all of that. And they recognize that we're planning kind of around what they're doing. But I would say our coaches here are very receptive to having conversations like this and kind of implementing that stuff. And our staff in the weight room is also, we're open-minded to be able to, learn a little bit more about the sports we're working with and be able to program them in a way that makes sense and makes sense for the sport coach, makes sense for the athlete, so that everyone kind of understands that we're all on the same page with all of this.
Yeah. Brian, I guess kind of ask you the same question as well too. I mean, you're obviously going through something similar. where you're coming up on the year and you'll be planning across a big program. What are some thoughts on some of those conversations?
Yeah, so we're more of a mixed bag. We have some coaches that are really, really receptive and they're like, do whatever you want. I'm like, awesome. And then we have others who, because before I got here, the strength and conditioning position wasn't a thing. And so if teams came up here, they were coming up here with their head coach, and depending on their background, they may have a lot of knowledge, they might have zero knowledge, and they're just kind of leading it. And so
Yeah.
some of those others, I use the term old school, is probably the wrong term, but they're not as receptive. But with a couple of them, and we've only used Fit for about 6 months now. One of them asked me like, "Hey, what are our plans for the fall?" And I was able to just create them a coach account, and they looked through all of it, and they saw what I did with it, and they made maybe just a few changes. I'm like, change whatever you want. I'll lead the teams, but you can put what you want in there. And it
Yeah.
seems to be a lot more of a smooth interaction.
Yeah, two personal thoughts on this is like, and this will be a little bit of a theme too. We'll talk about this with athletes later, but like, not everyone cares. Like it's like if you get a coaching staff, a head coaching staff of 20 or 25, not all 20 or 25 are going to care. Some people are going to say like, "Hey, this is your job. I trust you," or, whatever it may be. Maybe the relationship's a little more distant, but there's going to be a big percentage that does care. And for that percentage, one of my personal favorite expressions, I've probably overused this over the years, but people are more likely to believe in something that they feel like they had a hand in creating. To be totally honest, I'm not somebody who loves to plan too far ahead because I can't predict the future. I don't know what the performance outcomes are going to be. I don't know if we're going to be developing the right way, how the season's going to be going. But this isn't necessarily for me. If I can get a plan and do it collaboratively with coaches, those coaches are going to feel like, hey, I had a hand in creating that. It's not me against Brian. It's not me against TJ or Geoff. We did it together, and I feel a little bit more passionate about trying to make it work. So this right away ties into our theme of kind of being proactive. Um, from there, once we do the planning, it's like obviously we're all programming. We're plugging away at programming, as best we can. And in my conversations with high volume coaches, high school coaches, high volume training facilities, mid major, Division One, the customization conversation is interesting. Some coaches are very open to it. Other coaches, I think, view it as a little unrealistic. And I want to spend a little time trying to, talk about how we've done it, guys. And TJ, I'm going to throw it back to you in a minute. One way I'm going to intro this is that more and more I start thinking about groups within the larger team, whatever team it is, whether it's football, basketball, field hockey, whatever it may be. It's like we have the team roster and then we have these groups within the roster. I've kind of laid out some ways here that we might do that we're all familiar with. Certainly could be by position as an obvious one, could be by training age as an obvious one. But some of these other ones, it's like we have so much information. We don't want to miss an opportunity to do a good job training somebody. Maybe we have different movement or output strategies that we as coaches can clearly see. Some people are more force driven, some people more velocity and motion driven. Maybe it's game plus one, minus one scenarios. We have to do, development and recovery groups. Maybe it's like a rate limiting factor. I'm sure we've had athletes come to us all the time and say, "Coach, I want to work on my flexibility. Can you get me a different program?" We're already doing all this individualization. We just want a framework that we can actually act on it. TJ, I know you're acting on it quite a bit. You sent me some stuff regarding, position groups with the football team, which I think is pretty common. Talk to me about some of your group assignments that you're using with different teams.
Yeah, so I would say we actually probably have all of these that you have up there on the slide. We have groups created like that. So training age, all of our sports when they're coming in, will have kind of a separate. So for our summer programming, for sure, it's a separate program for returners versus incoming first years and transfers, just to get them a little bit more accustomed to certain things. Especially at this level, I don't get them in the summer, so I don't know any of them until they get here in the fall. So we have a little bit more of a basic nuts and bolts sort of program for our incoming athletes. Still differs by sport, but with a lot more focus on the basics. And then when they get here, we'll also separate. So I can put, a returners program up on fit. They take half the weight room. They know what they're doing because they've been with me before. And then I take the newcomers. We go in the back. We have weight room 101, where we kind of, explain one, how to use fit, how to go on, find your name on the tablet, see what you have for the day, but then also, teaching them certain things that we want them on. In some groups that lasts longer than others. With football last year, we had a separate newcomer program for about the first 4 to 6 weeks of the fall, looking at possibly doing something like that again. So in addition to position groups, we were also breaking off kind of by training age. Obviously, position's a big one with football with the different demands. We have done some different position specific groups for conditioning with some of our other sports, especially with sports that have goalkeepers, maybe needing a little bit different of an energy system development. So our hockeys, our soccers, our field hockeys have had, especially on their summer programs now coming into their preseason, different, position specific conditioning, just position players, goalies. Uh, we haven't done a ton with the strategy yet, but we're looking at getting into more of our data with force plate analysis that we have, to be able to kind of differentiate between, athletes that are more strength based versus more velocity based versus those that are in the middle and kind of filling the buckets that they need. Playing load is a big one that we use. I utilized that a lot with men's and women's basketball last season, just because we'd have 4 or 5 players that would play upwards of 30 minutes and then 12, 15 players that didn't play at all. And so, just making sure athletes are getting what they need and they're not, you know, game day is not an off day for them now. And then the next day is also an off day. And then, you're just stacking up off days. And then when your time comes, you're actually not ready to play. So we've done a bit with that where we have separate high minute categories for players and their lift is a little bit different, versus the ones that need to develop a little bit more. And then we've done some extra work as well, where we'll throw in, here's our hip mobility series, and we'll send them that. Put it into, all right, this is our group that needs more hip mobility. This is our group that needs more shoulder mobility. Or some people might have modifications that they need, and we'll have an upper body only program or a lower body only program for athletes coming off of, major injuries that we know they're going to be on that for a while. And so we utilize the groups a lot actually, because I feel like that helps us kind of create a framework. I like to use the term framework because they're not all doing exactly the same program, but they're also we're not writing 600 individually customized programs, but we have systems in place to be able to account for the individual differences. If an athlete needs more of this is our framework for giving them that. And then we can even make individual adjustments off of that. But I think having the system overall is what helps us kind of create more individualization within our scope, because we do have 500 plus athletes and 3 strength coaches that program for them. And so we're able to utilize these groups to actually make it a lot simpler to kind of organize those frameworks.
Yeah, no doubt. And so again, if I were listening to you talk about this for the first time, there'd be a part of me that's like, hey, that's great, but like I'm one coach and I got 500 athletes, or I got 600 athletes. And so when I hear you talk about that, I think about it's like, okay, great. How do I do that in practice and how do I do it in program? And Brian, I want to talk about in practice first, because I know this is a huge part of your job, given how many athletes you're seeing at the same time. I'll talk about my personal approach really quick is the more experienced I've got, the more I think about kind of like a constraints-based individualization model, which for me just basically means that the patterns are going to be very similar. Whether I'm trying to customize based on training strategy, playing load, training age, I want to be able to stand in front of the group and talk about the same pattern with very small adjustments. Hey, goblet squat group, holding the weight in front, we're reaching our elbows nice and firm. Back squat group that's going heavy today, bang, 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 talk about all my cues. So the patterns are the same. That kind of helps me get it done. Brian, why don't you talk about your approach? I know you see huge numbers at the same time. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so the way we have it set up, fall, winter, spring, we have anywhere between 12 and 16 teams. And I have an hour and 50 minutes a day of time to be able to see those teams, 4:10 to 6 o'clock. And so Mondays, for example, are usually our busiest days because there's most of our competition days are Wednesday, Saturday. And so Mondays, I'll have the swim team come in. I'll give them the recs. We'll have all their workouts on Fit on the tablet. Hey, you're off, go. And we might have one of the assistant swim coaches come up there and watch them. And then I'll have JV girls basketball out by the dumbbells. I'll have JV tennis out in the open area. And there's anywhere between 80 to 120 kids at a time up here. And my main goal is like, hey, kids, don't die. Um, don't drop something on your face. But um, what it kind of what Fit kind of helps out with is the swim team is, which is they're our top dog. They're our number one team by far. They're already taken care of because they can just go through and click on it, and then I can put my focus on the other two teams who aren't as athletic and aren't as seasoned, and I'm able to give them a lot more coaching. When in the past, I kind of left it to maybe my assistant coach or maybe one of the sport coaches to take care of them so that I could put my focus on the swim team.
Right. Right. And like, one thing I want to say just because as an overarching thing is like we've all been in those high volume environments. And I just wrote a social post, a column about this the other day about nothing's more important than what I call like the sanctity of the workout. Right. So it's like sometimes you can customize to the point that it's like you start to get lost on the sauce a little bit where it's like, okay, we have all this detail in the programming, but I'm looking at the actual product and I hate it. Right. So it's like keeping that in mind where it's like the actual training product has to be outstanding. I think we all know how to do that, right? It's culture, intent, accountability, consistency. Once we dial those things in, well, now the heart of our job is athlete development. I need to be able to push kids forward in the right direction. And the more I can start to work in some of these nuances, the better of a job I feel like I'm doing. Now, if that's kind of the in practice side of it, then there's the in program side of it. Because this is where I think a lot of coaches are like, it's just impossible. I don't have the time to do it. And I know when I think about kind of leading these virtual events, I work really hard to not make this a fit commercial. It's like this is just a conversation amongst coaches. But to some extent, we need the framework. We have to have a framework that allows us to do it. This is one thing in fit that does allow me to do it is I don't have to write different programs for different position groups. If you look at the screen right now, I have three different examples with some of those groups that we talked about where I can just create different blocks within the same training day and assign those blocks to specific groups. So again, if I have a recovery group that's in a goblet squat, I program goblet squat and that's all they're going to see. If I have my high intensity group for that day, if they're training trap bar deadlift, that's all they're going to see. I don't have the time to write 10 different programs or even two for every team. But if I can get it done in one, it's a massive time saver and allows me to create a better product. TJ, I know you're doing a lot with group assignments. I know you have football. I know you give a ton of attention to all your programs. Talk to me about this workflow, how you're using it, how it's been.
Absolutely. So football is the one that pops into my head right away when I look at this because we do have a lot of position specific differences with our blocks, but then we might also have some blocks that all of them have. And so that's something that I think is huge where, our A block might actually be the same for our bigs, our mids, and our skills. And so I just assign that to all the groups. And then I don't have to, create a separate program for all of them. So they all see that one. And then our B block might be where we get a little bit more specific position wise. And now the bigs see their program, mids and skills see theirs. And it's not, something completely different. They're working on similar patterns. It's just different, different ways of achieving the adaptation that we want. To adjust for the fact that they have slightly different demands within their position, even within the same sport. And so that's what I like about keeping it all on the same program, like you have shown up on the screen there. And especially when some of our blocks do go to the whole team, and so we're able to just assign that to the whole team. They see that, and then they see the other stuff that they need to see. So this feature has been super helpful for us in being able to differentiate between position groups. And then same thing with our high minute versus our typical lift. With our basketball groups, we would have the same movement patterns, and so I could just copy it, duplicate the block, and then just go in and adjust what I wanted to adjust for the high minutes, whether that's reps or changing up how they're holding it or the loading or something like that. But it makes it really simple to be able to have it all in one place so that I'm not jumping back and forth being like, oh, what was the pattern we work on this day with this team? Like, I see it right there and then I just make the adjustment.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's like I come back to just it's got to be realistic in your environment, right? Because that's the biggest thing is it's like at the end of the day, we got to be able to coach it on the floor. And this brings me back to what I had said before about kind of a constraints based pattern model. It's very rare that, for me personally as a coach, that I'm going to take two things with a big group that are very different. But if we're Olympic lifting, like TJ in your football example, if we're Olympic lifting and we got bigs pulling from the ground, and my skill group is in a hang position, let's say it's a clean progression, it's very easy for me to say, hey guys, the pattern's the same. Bigs, we're coming from the ground. Make sure we focus on great position at the bottom, accelerate bar speed, skills, a different set of cues. One of my favorite expressions that a mentor of mine taught me years ago that just really stuck with me is everything we do is something else we do. So again, power clean, hang power clean, I should be able to coach those things almost identically, but the stimulus and the way that the athlete develops hopefully is very different. Small changes, big outcomes. Brian, I want to get into individual a little bit, right? So it's like we're trying to cast the widest net we can. We write the team program, we get some group assignments in there. Those small changes make big differences. There's always some athletes that are just different. I think we all know that, right? We got kids with low back pain. You have the kids that are super immobile that just can't split squat. We have kids who maybe don't pick things up quite as quickly. Again, we're all fortunate FIT creates a framework that allows us to do this. If you look across these images here from left to right, what I can do basically is go into my drill modifiers and create threshold specific or individual specific modifications. So I can say, hey, if somebody's low back pain exceeds a value of 5, we're not going to deadlift. Or if I just have somebody that I know doesn't do certain drills, I can build it right in. Hey, if the athlete is TJ Cahill, well, TJ doesn't deadlift, he's going to front squat instead. So again, I have a framework that allows me to do this. Brian, I want to hear from you again because you have such big volume. I know we've talked about it before. How do you handle those one-off cases as a coach in such like a high volume environment?
Yeah, so outside of our swim team, 90% of our athletes, they don't really have the aspirations to play at the next level. And so that group of kids, they're getting very simple stuff and it's kind of all the same. The only sport specific thing I do is I write their team name at the top instead of the other teams. With our swim team though, yeah, we'll test them at the very start and then we'll sort them into 3 different groups. Basically just fundamentals, distance, and sprinters. And so the movements are all very similar. Like it says barbell Zercher squat there, for example. We might put our sprinters on those and go through and change it. And then with our distance, we'll give them something a little simpler, maybe even just a front squat or with the straps. And then with our fundamentals, they might be doing a goblet squat hold or something of that
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah. It just makes such a big difference. I mean, I think younger me wouldn't have seen it. And then, the more experience I've got and the more I think one of the things I'm lucky is I've gotten to work with such a wide array of groups. Like you mentioned, like swim, like your swim program being kind of like one of, like the elite program. That's unique, right? It's not football. It's not basketball. It's something that's totally different task. I think about my time in Northeastern. I worked with the women's rowing program there. Anybody who's worked with rowing or familiar with it, it's a huge group, number one, and it can just turn into a mess pretty quickly. You have kids with a lot of different training ages, and then the physical demands is they'll be on the water in the morning and they'll come back. And you'll have 8 or 10 kids that will walk in and say, hey, Geoff, the water is really choppy this morning. I know we're supposed to deadlift. I don't think I can do it. That would be a mess at the whiteboard otherwise. I'm at the whiteboard like a jackass writing all the modifications and everything. But it's like the more I can implement a framework that does some of that stuff for me, makes my life better. But more importantly, it makes a better training experience for the kids. So, big thing is we don't want to be afraid to customize where needed. Let's not get lost in the sauce, but creating a high performance environment, even in a high volume setting. a strategy and a framework to make sure we're bucketing and individualizing by group, and then capturing those kids that are falling through the cracks potentially. I want to shift gears a little bit into testing and monitoring. This is one that I'm really passionate about in these high volume environments because budgets are tight. They've never been tighter. I've experienced it at Northeastern. I experienced it at UMass Boston. And you just don't always have these perfect things available to you. TJ, with the staff we have on hand, TJ, I know you've done an amazing job building up your tech stack. Brian, I know your approach is a little bit different. You're kind of using what you got. So I laid out the things that I think are really, really important here. Whatever you do for testing and monitoring, number one, it's got to be the foundation of communication. It's really tough to justify progress to coaches and athletes. Everybody wants to get better. It's tough to justify it if everything is subjective. There's got to be something objective that we can communicate to coaches. And again, this brings me back to the point about putting it in their hands. Let them be a part of the story in terms of what are we going to do? I think about my relationship with the men's basketball program at Northeastern. I would sit down with Coach Cohen and ask him, Coach, what moves the needle? What's important to you? Some of what he said I would agree with, other stuff not as much, but he was driving the ship. And then I said, okay, how are we going to execute this stuff regularly? Do we have the tools to be able to do it? It doesn't always have to be, force plates and GPS systems. It can be jump mats. It can be OVRs. It can be broad jump. It can be stopwatch. I'm not afraid to break out the stopwatches and do 10-yard splits and pro agilities. There's ways to do it. Just got to be consistent with it. I have some notes about, varied KPIs, which I think we're all doing. And again, it's consistency over complexity. Brian, I want to turn it over to you and honestly just tell us about your testing. When you and I first met, this was one of the first things we talked about. And I said, this guy is out of his mind. I couldn't believe the work you were doing. What do you have available to you? What's important and how do you execute it consistently?
Yeah, so our swim, I'll just keep using our swim team as an example. It's who we do the most testing with. We'll test them 4 times a year. We have a jump mat, we have speed sensors. We'll send them through an FMS screen, well, overhead squat, grip strength, moving it over, and then we'll test their body weight, and then we'll do some RSI type things as well. And so what they'll do daily, we call it daily jump mat. Every single time they come in, that they get 1 jump on the jump mat, which mentally it doesn't always work out for them because most kids don't understand, and those results are going to look like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Right? They want it to go up every single day, and it's just not going to, which they don't usually understand until maybe February. They'll continue to come up and ask me like, hey, why are my numbers not going up? I'm like, well, it is over time. Just you're tired this week. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But we'll go through and test, and we'll keep track of every single test every single year, and then we'll compare it. And that's been one of the biggest things as far as getting other teams to buy in for us is show them like, hey, our swim team comes here 3 times a week. This is exactly the results they got from it. Maybe your team should start coming in twice a week, And so, sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, so you talked about consistent execution. Like I love how you said it's daily jump. Love that it's daily jump. And you referenced jump mat. Like I said, what do you have available to you? And then I guess the third part is like, how are you managing the information? Like how do you get it in and then how do you communicate it to student athlete?
Yeah, so right now it's all on a Google spreadsheet. It looks like just a jumbled bunch of numbers. And then recently I've been using AI. I just copy and paste all it in AI and it creates a whole report for me. And so I'm in the process of trying to get it all moved because we just recently moved into Fit. And so hopefully with Fit, we can it's all on their profile and they can just click there and view it anytime they want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, my favorite thing that you mentioned is just the idea of and I remember this from our first conversation is like daily jump mat. You just talked about like the roller coaster. And I think this has multiple benefits is like testing is a monster, right? Like I particularly remember being in Division 3 environment and we would have, sport coaches who would say that, I want to test them at the beginning of every semester. And that just doesn't do anything for me. I think it creates a cool environment for the kids sometimes. I think there's a big portion of athletes that love that kind of block testing environment, especially the strength work. But it literally is almost like a throwaway week for me. And then, Brian, to your point, it doesn't help kids with a personal understanding. It tells them nothing about their long term development. It tells them nothing about how they react to fatigue and readiness. And I
Yeah.
went through exactly what he said, where kids will say, like, coach, I haven't PR'd on my 10-yard sprint in 3 weeks. What's going on? And it's like, yeah, your 10-yard sprint today was 175. If I go back 6 months ago, your 10-yard sprint on average was like 1.9. Like
Yeah.
it's pretty significant, So I think there's so much value. The term that I learned from some people in my network is the idea of embedded testing, an embedded testing model. We want testing in the program all the time to the point that kids don't even know it. Hey,
Yeah.
let's go get on the, and TJ, I'll throw this to you in a minute, but let's go get on the force plate. Well, coach, I'm really sore today. Don't care. Go jump. I want to see it. And I want to get those data points over time. Did you have something else, Brian? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, and we'll also use it to kind of just get a feel for the entire team. And so on Mondays when they come in and lift, we have it all set up to where whatever they got for that day, it's going to be shown against a percentage of their max. And so if the
Yeah.
team for that day was all 85% to 90% of what their max is, they're tired. Maybe we should kind of deload a little bit this week. And if they're
Yeah.
all 95% to 100% and hitting PRs, we're like, oh, let's bump it up a notch and let's get after it.
Yeah. Yeah. PJ, obviously your testing's a little bit different too. And I know you're a little more on like the embedded testing side as well too. Did you agree with some of what I just laid out? Like talk to me about how you kind of approach it day to day.
Yeah, I like what you said about embedded testing is huge because, for our situation in D3, um, my fall sports were some of them will test in camp, but we also only have a week of camp before classes start, and then they're playing games. So, it's not a ton of time to just waste 2 or 3 sessions on testing exclusively. And then our winter sports, I only have 5 or 6 weeks with them before they start practicing. And so we want to actually utilize that time to train and prepare them for the season coming up. So we're able to do, we utilize the metric tests in fit quite a bit, where, they might their last set of trap bar, their last set of bench is a test set. And so they're still getting working sets in there. And then they do their test set. They plug what reps they got in on fit. And then I can see all of them kind of lined up there. And then throughout the course of the year, once they're in season, we're testing our jumps weekly with our force plates. And I'll have them put that information into fit as well. We're testing 10-yard sprints as well. And so we'll utilize the metric test on fit. And, it does require the athletes to pay attention and to remember their number and input it into fit, which is about, I would say, 80 to 85% of our athletes are compliant with that. Uh, we're working on getting that more. Obviously, in a perfect world, we would be watching every single rep and we would put it in, but we don't have that. The bandwidth to be able to do that. So we're relying on them to be able to put their number in and know how to type the decimal point in their 10-yard sprint correctly, so that it doesn't say that their 10-yard sprint was 2.5 minutes long. But we're working on that. But yeah, we're testing mostly embedded within, and then obviously monitoring throughout the season with some jumps, with some sprints. We don't do a ton of strength testing in season, but that is something that I've gotten more into. Utilizing the context of what's going on in their season rather than just saying, oh, they're in season. This is what the book says we need to do. An example is last spring, we had a lot of snow up here in the Northeast. Our lacrosse teams did not get outside until week 3 of their practice season. So, in theory, they're getting their conditioning through through playing their sport, but utilizing the context of the situation where they weren't actually able to go outside. They were doing small-sided stuff in our little field house and not actually able to do stuff. We actually did throw in a little bit more higher intensity type, stuff that we tested with them in season, strength-wise and conditioning-wise, that we might not have otherwise done.
Yeah.
But for the most part in season, we're monitoring and then being able to make adjustments and start conversations off of that. And that's where, it ties back into, the first question you had asked at the beginning was conversations with coaches and being able to provide the coaches with data like, hey, everyone's jump was down this week, or everyone is sprinting,
Yeah.
slower this week. What can we do to kind of, pull back to get them a little bit more ready to play on game day and not, burnt out by the middle of the week.
Man, you said so many good things in there. Tough for me to keep track of. So I want to go back to what you said about open set testing. I totally forgot about that. It's just such a good nugget of information in high volume environments, and if you're dealing with like younger training age, because the whole block testing 1RM thing, it's such a song and dance. Again, it can be a fun environment, but it's like you can only do it so many times a year. It's high stress for the coach, to be honest with you, depending on what you're doing. But this is, again, if I go back to my rowing example, almost every third week, guys, our last set of bench today is an open set, 3 to 5 repetitions, get a spotter. When you get done, plug in your reps, plug in your weight. And then a little bit of a plug here is I can actually put in a formula to make sure the system is calculating my new 1RM. So I'm doing very little work to get the updated, strength and power testing, which is so beneficial. The last thing that you said too is so good. When we're testing all the time, we're not going to react to a few individuals being up or down, but it's those moments when you start to see it across the board. Hey, coach, the whole team is smoked. It's been 3 days in a row now. The last 3 times we've gotten on the plate or the jump mat, or the last 3 times we've sprinted, the whole team is smoked. We got to start looking at the schedule, or we got to start looking at the volume. And it becomes this kind of like informed conversation that's not an overreaction, but it's something that you caught that if you're block testing, you just had no chance to catch. Really good stuff. On this slide here, really just another anecdote. Like, this is just some of the testing I had done with basketball programs in the past. When you look at this in a spreadsheet, it looks like we're up on the basketball court and that we're collecting all these things at one time. That's so rarely how it was. I would either get them before or after lift, normally lift and practice kind of adjacent to each other. And I might just go up on the court and just say, guys, we're getting 7-yard shuffle. Everybody gets 2 reps both sides today. This shouldn't take any more than 5 minutes to get through. And we just fly through it, and I have a data point on 7-yard shuffle. If I have a little more time, maybe we spend it doing pro agility. Hey guys, this week we're getting pro agility. So I'm getting each one of these once a month. So again, it's a little bit more frequent and a little more embedded. And TJ, you kind of mentioned just by happenstance that you have the athletes doing a lot of this work for you. They kind of put it in because it's like we can't be sitting at spreadsheets, putting all this stuff in all the time. Something that's a little bit more detailed that I actually don't know if you guys are doing this. I don't think we've talked about it yet, but one of the creative things that I've learned is I can set up these like subjective KPIs. I think so many of the KPIs in a lot of these platforms, they're all objective information, right? It's strength testing, it's jump testing, speed, agility. But like, how do we manage things like low back pain or kids who can't overhead load or axially load? We all have those kids, no matter where you're coaching, middle school, high school, mid-major, college, whatever. Again, I want a system to be able to account for those things. This picture here is just kind of a list of some modifiers that I can put on a drill. And again, I can do it proactively. I can do it with the athletic trainer. I can do it with the coaching staff. If we have athletes who score back pain above a certain value, we're never going to deadlift those people. If we have a return to play case or cases where they're non-collision, maybe it's a rolled ankle, maybe it's returning from soft tissue. Non-collision, well, we're not going to jump. We're going to keep them on the ground and do med ball drills or tosses or whatever it may be, kind of like an alternative plyometric. And I mentioned before, I even want to be able to modify down to the individual level. So this is something that I'll work with you guys on more and more if you haven't dove into this, but you can literally set up these like subjective assessments to kind of manage the things that are a little bit more ambiguous. Sticking with testing and monitoring, this is one of my favorite. Well, when I say favorite, it's one of the things I kind of chuckle at. TJ, you first on this. Like the preseason environment sometimes, like I think back with like soccer programs where it's like we have to have our conditioning test before we start. And then it's on you to like run the conditioning test. And then so you get all the information. And then like very often nothing happens with that information because it's just impossible to manage. Do you feel like that's pretty accurate
Yeah,
representation of
I haven't seen that as much here at Nichols College, but in previous experiences, I've definitely encountered that. Yeah.
Brian, you have any experience with that, like preseason testing or anything like that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then it all goes out the window.
Well, not even being funny. Like, tell me about your experience with what was the team, what was the test, what happens to the information.
Well, I mean, because almost every coach they want some sort of testing done to be able to kind of see where their team's at, and we'll have what's called priority sports. Like other than the swim team, we have four teams underneath it that are called priority sports, and so they get an extra term. And so basketball, for example, their in season is in the winter, and then their fall off season is in the fall. Meaning they only have to choose a different sport in the spring because where we're at, we have to choose a different sport fall, winter, and spring. And so like the coach, for example, we'll test at the fall. I'm like, okay, we're going to go through a whole program. At the end of the fall, we'll test again. I'll be able to share with you all the data points. And where the testing doesn't really get thrown out the window, the programming does, because we'll go through and the first 2 weeks will be great. And then something will come up and the coach is like, hey, our team can't lift this week. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then the next week, hey, our team can't lift this week. And so the programming kind of gets pushed aside, which makes the results from the end testing not what it would have been, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it makes total sense. It's like I understand like the impetus for it, right? Like we all like data, we like to have a baseline. I've been a part of this so many times where it might not even come from me, it might be like a coaching request. And if my thing is if we're going to do it, we better make it count because none of us have time to waste. So if we're doing something, it needs to give some value. The images here, this is a little bit of what we call it fit like conditional logic. But the idea basically is that if I get data outputs, I want to be able to act on it. And this goes back to what I had said about like coaches, where like not every coach cares or wants to be involved. Not every student athlete is going to do this stuff. But at least you can look back and say, I provided the resources. I gave the framework. I provided the resources. I have an example here of like a yo-yo test. I'm sure almost all of our coaches, if not all, that are attending this, familiar with the yo-yo test. Really common preseason soccer test. So we do it, and coaches set like a pass fail. But what happens to the athlete who fails? They don't play, and then like how do they develop? And so what I want to do is be able to create something where it's like, okay, we set we set a team standard. And for those who don't meet the team standard, I have a system in place that allows me to assign extra work. I don't have the bandwidth to always run that extra work and be there to hold your hand through it, but I can get that work assigned to you and verbally say, "Hey, Brian, you're going to find some extra work in your account this week. Would love for you to be able to hit that conditioning once or twice a week to help you get to where you want to go on the field." Um, TJ, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think you have use for something like this? Is this something you're doing now? Are you able to help people work through pass fail conditioning tests?
So we haven't used it like this on Fit, but we do have several teams with pass fail conditioning tests, and kind of like you said, they fail, maybe they run it again in a few days, they fail again, kind of what happens after that, and so that's something that we're looking more into this year is creating a system like this where we can actually help those athletes get into the shape that they need to get into. But like you said, without having the bandwidth to sit there and run the session, program it for them in Fit and utilize this aspect to be able to kind of make it so that their standard and their test does mean something, and it's not just, oh, if you didn't pass, all right, you don't play until you pass. Like, how can we help them actually pass the test?
Totally. Totally. The other, the other scenario I think like one of the things I think all the time as a coach is like never miss an opportunity to coach. And I know that's tough in high volume environments, but like I think about something like game plus one, game minus one, and how many times I've had coaches across sports over the years. They just tell me that they're terrified to train because of their past experience or, kind of survivorship bias or, whatever it may be. And so it's like, well, we're not going to lift the day before a game and we can't lift the day after. And again, this is an area where you can gain some trust. It's like show that you have a framework in place. It's like all I need is the box score for that basketball game, and I can get people into their groups. All I need for me working with hockey, all I need is a time on ice from the weekend. Give me the time on ice, and I'll handle Monday lift. So just another example of never miss an opportunity to train. TJ, just kind of cool here. I know it's a little thing, but you would send me this over too. I'm sure the kids love having like their game schedule in their program.
Yeah, that's something that, for us planning wise. So last year in the fall, I really didn't put the logos in or anything. I just put the game days. And then one of my GAs who has since graduated, but one of my GAs from last year was like, there was some competition week. I think baseball was having like a big team competition. He just started throwing images up there. I was like, oh, I didn't even realize you could do that. And I was like, I'm going to do that with the logos so I can see like, all right, it's a game day. Not only is it a game day, but like, all right, now it's an extra level of just, all right, this is who we're playing, and then it's a quick look at, for our scheduling purposes. I put that in first, and then I just look quickly. I'm like, all right, most of the games are Wednesday, Saturday. We're gonna lift on Monday, Thursday, something like that, and it lets me just simply see when they have their games, and then it kind of just looks cool to have the pictures up there as well.
No doubt. And it is a little thing, but I will say it is all cohesion though. Like I won't name the team or anything like that because this won't sound great coming out of my mouth, but there's one team in particular I can think of that they would tell me, coaching staff would tell me, hey Geoff, this is a week that the opponents that we have, we should handle pretty good. Let's take advantage of this week. Volume up, intensity up, we'll be fine. And then there's other weeks where it's like, hey, big week for us. Make sure we're ready to go. It's easier for me to manage when I have game schedules right in the program. This is one way to do it. There are some other ways as well, but we're running a little low on time. I want to make sure I get through everything and then see if we have a question or two. So where I want to kind of wrap this up is just with communication. Well, I think when you're in a high volume environment like we all are, the communication with athletes, the communication with coaches is just impossible. We only have so much time. A good framework can help you create more time for yourself. You're literally doing work faster than what you normally would be able to. I have some imagery here about testing and reporting, but we don't care about the pictures. I care about your guys' experience. Brian, I want to start with you. You talked about all the data and information that you're able to collect, particularly with that swim group.
Mhm.
What are some of the conversations like with the athletes and the coaches, and how are you able to kind of create coherence between everybody?
Yeah, and so the biggest thing for us is we try to group them. And so like we'll have like our top 5 jumpers, for example, all be at the same rack. That way they can kind of compete with each other. And we don't have a guy who's hitting 32 on the jump mat grouped with a guy that's hitting 19 on the jump mat. And then the guy that's hitting 19 is just feels like he has no chance in life. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And so that's kind of we group our racks based off of how high they jump. Like
Smart.
we have 11 racks. Hopefully it's going to be 13 in a couple months. But and we group them by how high they jump. Sometimes in the spring we'll even make it kind of co-ed. And so boys and girls will be on the same racks. And we just kind of go from there.
It's smart, man. Like I can. It's funny when we all work in different environments. You just have different things that are on top of mind. I feel like I can tell you're really good with the emotional component to it, like the way that like the athlete perceives things. Like that's probably an area I haven't been that good in the past. Is like I always just say like, hey, listen, we're all different. Don't worry about somebody next to you. But like kids care.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, man.
especially high school kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. Um, last couple of images here. This almost kind of just brings us full circle a little bit. Is like that expression I used earlier about like people are more likely to believe in something they feel they had a hand in creating. Like for me, I would sit down in weekly meetings, and this is more information than what coaches needed. But if I can just get it, if I can just aggregate the information in a report and just send it to the coaches or the coaching staff, and I would literally sit there and say, hey, you guys have the information available to you. I might pick one or two things that I really want to talk about or really want to highlight. Um, and this, again, it gives me a framework to be able to do it. TJ, with especially I think like early in football season, how much do you have conversations about just like the group, like global development? How much are we developing? How am I showing that? Is that something you guys do pretty frequently?
Yeah, I would say so. Last year was a bit of a different year. We ended up encountering a lot of injuries early on, and we we ended up having a lot of young guys have to step up and play. So we didn't have as much development going on as we would have liked to see. But we have a much bigger roster this year, and we're looking forward to kind of having that type of environment where the guys that are on the field are developing in certain ways, and then the guys that aren't getting as much time or any time are developing as well throughout the course of their career, because that also helps with keeping them interested in being part of the program. And that's something that's super important to us, is making sure that all of the athletes are developing, and not just the ones that are playing on the field and getting all the time, but making sure all of them are developing. And so last year was a little bit different than I think this year will be, but we have some frameworks in place to kind of get out in front of that, and have conversations with the coaches about developing guys, and giving reports, and little metrics here and there to kind of make sure everyone's going in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. It's so important. Like one of the things that I mean, you guys can tell I'm passionate about this, and like, I just think sometimes, again, Division III high school, you can just make such an impact, more, probably more of an impact than what you can potentially make at a higher level, because at the highest levels everybody's doing it. But like TJ, this is meant to be a compliment, not not a slight at all. So you and I are local. I'm familiar with Nichols. I'm old. I went to school in 2008, and I went to UMass Boston as an athlete there. Nichols athletics wasn't anything that I thought about. And neither really were we. I mean, we weren't really like a powerhouse program or anything like that. We invested in the department. Part of that investment was strength and conditioning. And I felt like as we created this almost like Division I environment, you could see teams winning. Volleyball in the Final Four, baseball in the World Series, men's ice hockey in the Frozen Four one year. Now, fast forward a little bit, I feel like in real time, I've seen Nichols make a very similar change in the last like 6 to 8 years, where you guys get the new weight room, you have investment in the department, and you guys are a monster. Like men's basketball is a monster.
Yeah, I would say our support for athletics and for the support staff throughout this whole institution is, pretty impressive at this level. I've been at other places at the same level that has not had that type of support. And, this is very much an athletics based school. Like everyone goes to every game, and things like that. And most of our school is student athletes. I think it's a pretty cool environment to be a part of when a school really wants to invest in their athletics in this way. And I think even just having fit is a testament to that. Having fit, being able to have force plates, like our school sees the benefit in having that, and having, the ability to provide graduate assistance for strength and conditioning, so that we can have, a little bit more bandwidth to get more done with our athletes. And I think the student athlete is really at the focus of a lot of people's attention here at Nichols.
I love it. I know most coaches only have a hard hour. I only got one question that came through during this, and Brian, it's actually for you. And I think somebody scoffed when you said you have 80 kids in the room at a time and an hour and 50 minutes to do it. Question is really simple. It was just how do you manage that? What are the challenges and how do you manage that?
Yeah, we got to separate them into groups, sometimes if the teams are small enough, I'll put two or three teams on the same rack or on the racks. And then we have an open area, and then we have a dumbbell area. and we kind of sort them into those three groups. And I'll tell the kids like, hey, if you need dumbbells, go grab them, take them to your area. Don't leave this area because we have other teams that are coming in and out. And sometimes, and when it gets too busy, I do away with it. But whenever we're doing like our sprint testing with our swim team, I'll have the speed sensors set up and they're running through, and then kids are walking back and forth, and we're try not to butt heads. You know what I mean? Like try
Yeah.
not to run into each other.
Yeah.
But we just separate them into their own little areas, and we say if you need something outside of this area, grab it, bring it back, but try your best to stay in this area. And
Yeah,
so
man. Unreal.
usually,
It's,
well, sorry.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Usually it's separate. We'll have like a 410 group. And so at 410, here, I'll even try to find one of our busy. But at 410, we'll have our swim team, girls varsity basketball, boys varsity basketball, and JV tennis from 410 to 5. And then at 5, our squash team will come in, boys or girls. Usually like a JV soccer, a fall baseball group, and a fall softball group. And so we're normally going through anywhere between 6 to 10 teams a day within that hour and 50 minutes.
It's crazy. It's such a good example. It's like no one knows their environment like the coach who's coaching in it, right? Like I bet every single person who's on this call, and then certainly us three, no one could do a better job than the person who's currently doing it. Because it's like you just have to learn that environment and how to manage it. And every environment's so different. So on that note, can't thank you guys enough. Super lucky to have you. Super lucky to work with you guys. Lots of good stuff in here. And then for all the coaches on the call, thank you guys very much. I hope this was helpful. I know more and more coaches in high volume environments, you're trying to create this elite environment because that's what coaches want, that's what the athletes want, and that's what we all want. That's what we want to work in. So I hope there were some good nuggets in here today, and I appreciate it and hope to see you next time. Thanks everybody very much.